The morning mist clung heavily to the shattered landscape of Hooge on a fateful day in July of 1915. British soldiers huddled inside their fortified trenches and peered nervously into the gray gloom of no man's land. The silence was not peaceful but heavy with the threat of imminent violence. Suddenly, a distinct hissing sound cut through the quiet air like a serpent warning of a strike. Before the sentries could raise an alarm, a massive jet of liquid fire erupted from the German lines. The burning stream arced gracefully through the air before splashing down upon the terrified defenders. This was not merely an explosion, but a deluge of chemical terror that defied every instinct of survival. Panic was immediate and absolute as the liquid fire clung to uniforms and sandbags alike. Men scrambled desperately to escape the inferno that consumed the oxygen around them and turned their defensive positions into ovens. The instinct to hold the line evaporated in the face of a weapon that brought a primal fear to the modern battlefield. This event at Hooge marked a significant escalation in the brutality of trench warfare. It was the debut of a weapon designed not just to kill, but to break the psychological will of the enemy. The flamethrower had arrived on the world stage, and it brought with it a new definition of horror. The stakes of the conflict in Europe had reached a breaking point by the second year of the Great War. The stalemate of the trenches had created a bloody deadlock where gains were measured in inches and casualties in the thousands. Military commanders on both sides were desperate for any technological advantage that could pierce the impregnable defensive lines. The machine gun and heavy artillery had made movement across open ground nearly impossible. Germany turned to its engineering corps to find a solution that could clear trenches without the need for a protracted bayonet charge. The answer lay in the ancient concept of Greek fire, reimagined for the industrial age. At the center of this terrifying innovation was a German engineer named Richard Fiedler. He had spent years before the war perfecting a device he called the Flamethrower. Fiedler was a man obsessed with the mechanics of pressurized gas and the projection of burning oil. He understood that a stream of fire could reach into the blind spots of a fortification where bullets and shrapnel could not go. His early demonstrations to the German general staff were met with a mixture of awe and revulsion. Yet the necessity of the war effort overrode any moral hesitation. The Kaiser approved the weapon and specialized units were formed to wield it. The question that haunted the military strategists was whether this weapon could truly alter the course of the war. Could a device that required the operator to approach within 20 or 30 yards of the enemy survive the lethality of modern combat? The flamethrower operator was effectively walking into the jaws of death, carrying a tank of highly flammable fuel on his back. He became a priority target for every enemy rifleman and machine gunner on the field. The effectiveness of the weapon depended entirely on shock and the ability of the supporting infantry to exploit the chaos it created. It was a gamble of high risk and high reward. The reveal of the weapon's effectiveness came swiftly during the early engagements at Verdun and the Argonne Forest. The German army deployed two distinct versions of the device to maximize tactical flexibility. The first was the Clafe or light flamethrower, which could be carried by a single man for mobile assaults. The second was the Graf or large flamethrower, which was a static siege weapon capable of sustaining a flame for nearly a minute. These weapons cleared trenches with ruthless efficiency and forced defenders to flee or face incineration. The psychological impact was devastating, and reports of the fire devils spread rapidly through the Allied ranks. The mechanics of the early flamethrower were deceptively simple, yet dangerous to master. The device consisted of a vertical cylindrical tank divided into two internal compartments. The lower section held the pressurized nitrogen gas, while the upper section contained the flammable oil mixture. When the operator opened the valve, the gas forced the oil through a rubber hose and out of a metal lance. A simple igniter wick at the tip of the lance turned the spray into a roaring jet of flame. The operator had to manage the pressure carefully to ensure the stream reached its target without sputtering out prematurely. To operate this machine, the German army created a new breed of soldier known as the Sturmpionier, or assault pioneer. These men were selected for their physical strength and mental fortitude. They underwent rigorous training to handle the heavy equipment while navigating the cratered terrain of the battlefield. The stern pioneer knew that his lifespan on the front line was measured in minutes once he opened fire. He was a specialist who walked the razor edge between being a hero to his comrades and a martyr for the cause. Their uniform was often distinct, and they wore heavy protective aprons to shield themselves from the heat. Despite their terrifying power, the flamethrower operators faced a unique and horrific set of dangers. If a bullet struck the fuel tank on their back, the result could be a catastrophic explosion that would engulf the operator and anyone nearby. Even without a direct hit, the sheer heat of the weapon was exhausting, and the smoke obscured vision. The pioneers often worked in pairs, with one man operating the lance and another carrying extra fuel or providing cover fire. It was an intimate form of warfare where the killer could see the eyes of his victims before unleashing the fire. The British and French armies scrambled to develop their own versions of the weapon after witnessing its effects. The British initially experimented with massive static flamethrowers installed in tunnels beneath no man's land. The greatest of these was the Liven's large gallery flame projector, which was a behemoth capable of shooting fire hundreds of feet. While effective in specific ambushes, these static monsters lacked the mobility required for dynamic offenses. The Allies eventually adopted portable models similar to the German design, but the German pioneers remained the masters of the craft throughout the First World War. By the time the armistice was signed in November of 1918, the flamethrower had cemented its place in the arsenal of modern warfare. It had not won the war single-handedly, but it had proven that technology could weaponize the elements in new and cruel ways. The image of the soldier with the tank on his back became a symbol of the relentless ingenuity of destruction. As the world entered the interwar period, military theorists began to analyze how to improve the range and reliability of the weapon. The horror of the trenches faded, but the blueprints for the fire machine remained in the archives. The United States watched these developments from across the Atlantic with keen interest. The U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service began experimenting with flamethrower designs during the 1920s and 1930s. They recognized that future conflicts might involve fortified positions that traditional infantry weapons could not reduce. The engineers focused on creating a system that was lighter and more reliable than the crude devices of the previous war. They tested various fuel mixtures to find liquids that would burn hotter and stick to targets rather than splashing off harmlessly. As the clouds of war gathered again in the late 1930s, the development of the portable flamethrower accelerated. The introduction of the M1 flamethrower gave American troops a man-portable weapon ready for the coming storm. However, the early M1 had significant flaws, including a heavy weight and a tendency for the electronic ignition system to fail in humid conditions. The fuel tanks were cumbersome, and the range was still dangerously short. Soldiers in training often regarded the device with suspicion and feared that it was as dangerous to the user as it was to the enemy. The outbreak of World War II brought the flamethrower to the forefront of combat in the Pacific Theater. The nature of the fighting against the Imperial Japanese Army was fundamentally different from the open maneuvers of Europe. The Japanese strategy relied heavily on elaborate networks of bunkers and tunnels and hidden caves. These fortifications were often impervious to artillery and aerial bombardment. The only way to neutralize them was to destroy the defenders inside at close range. The flamethrower transformed from a specialized tool into an absolute necessity for the U.S. Marines. The dense jungles of Guadalcanal and the coral ridges of Peleliu became the testing grounds for this brutal form of combat. Marines learned that a standard rifle squad could be pinned down for hours by a single hidden machine gun nest. The solution was a coordinated assault where riflemen provided suppressive fire while the flamethrower operator crawled forward. Once in range, the operator would direct a stream of fire into the aperture of the bunker. The fire did not just burn, it consumed the oxygen, causing suffocation for those deep inside the complex. A critical breakthrough in technology occurred with the invention of napalm. Harvard scientists developed this thickening agent, which turned liquid gasoline into a sticky gel. Napalm allowed the fuel to carry further and burn longer than straight gasoline. It adhered to walls and ceilings and uniforms, ensuring that the target was thoroughly neutralized. This innovation dramatically increased the effective range of the flamethrower and made it a far more formidable weapon. The introduction of napalm marked the transition from the erratic sprays of World War I to the precise streams of World War II. The improved M2 flamethrower became the iconic weapon of the Pacific Campaign. It featured a more reliable ignition system and a distinctive profile with 2 fuel tanks and a smaller pressure tank. The operator held a gun group with a trigger and a grip designed for stability. Despite the improvements, the M2 was still a heavy burden, weighing nearly 70 pounds when fully loaded. Marines had to be incredibly fit to run and crawl and fight while strapped to this volatile cargo. The sheer physical exhaustion of carrying the weapon was a constant challenge. The Battle of Tarawa showed the grim necessity of the flamethrower in amphibious assaults. The Japanese defenders had turned the small island into a fortress of concrete and palm logs. U.S. Marines waded ashore into a storm of fire and found that their grenades bounced harmlessly off the pillboxes. It was the flamethrower teams who moved methodically from bunker to bunker to silence the guns. The combat was visceral and immediate, often taking place at distances of less than 10 yards. The courage required to stand up and fire under such conditions was immense. The psychological impact on the Japanese defenders cannot be overstated. The code of Bushido instilled a refusal to surrender and a willingness to fight to the death. However, the primal fear of fire often broke the resolve where explosives failed. The sound of the compressed gas rushing through the nozzle became a harbinger of doom. In many instances, the mere presence of a flamethrower team preparing to fire was enough to cause defenders to retreat deeper into their caves or attempt a desperate banzai charge. Nowhere was the use of the flamethrower more pivotal than on the black sands of Iwo Jima. The island was a honeycomb of volcanic tunnels and concealed artillery positions. The U.S. Marines faced a defense in depth that was designed to bleed them white. Every yard of ground had to be paid for in blood and fire. It was here that the legend of the flamethrower operator was etched into history. Among the many brave souls, one man stood out for his extraordinary actions that would earn him the highest military honor. Corporal Herschel Williams was a reserve Marine who found himself at the center of the battle for the airfields on Iwo Jima. Facing a network of reinforced concrete pillboxes that had stalled the American advance, Williams volunteered to go forward alone. Covered only by 4 riflemen, he strapped on his 70-pound M2 flamethrower and moved toward the enemy lines. For 4 hours, he went back and forth between the lines to refuel and return to the fight. He destroyed 7 enemy positions single-handedly while under constant small arms fire. The heroism of Herschel Williams highlighted the unique role of the flamethrower operator as a devastating force multiplier. He had to approach the aperture of a pillbox and insert the nozzle directly into the opening to ensure destruction. At one point, he climbed atop a bunker and fired down through the air vent to kill the occupants inside. His actions cleared the way for the infantry to advance and proved that a single determined individual with the right weapon could shift the tide of a local engagement. Williams survived the battle and received the Medal of Honor. While the portable flamethrower was the primary tool of the infantry, the military also developed mechanized versions. The Sherman tank was adapted into a flame-throwing variant known as the Ronson or the Crocodile in British service. These tanks replaced the main gun or the bow machine gun with a massive flame projector. They carried hundreds of gallons of fuel and could shoot a stream over 100 yards. The tank provided the crew with armor protection that the foot soldier lacked, allowing them to roll right up to enemy fortifications. In the European theater, the flamethrower tank proved invaluable in the hedgerows of Normandy. The thick vegetation and earthen embankments provided perfect cover for German anti-tank teams. Allied tanks would spray the hedgerows with fire to flush out the defenders before the infantry moved in. This method saved countless lives and accelerated the breakout from the beachheads. The sight of a tank belching a massive tongue of fire was often enough to induce surrender among even the most hardened SS troops. As World War II ended and the Cold War began, the flamethrower remained in the US arsenal. It saw service again during the Korean War, where the rugged terrain and human wave attacks of the enemy necessitated massive firepower. The M2 was upgraded to the M2A1, which offered better reliability and easier maintenance. However, the nature of warfare was shifting toward long-range engagement and air superiority. The close-quarters combat that necessitated the flamethrower was becoming less common in the doctrine of the nuclear age. The Vietnam War saw the final major deployment of the flamethrower by US forces. The dense jungles and the Viet Cong tunnel systems presented a tactical problem similar to the Pacific Campaign. The updated M9A1 flamethrower was lighter and more effective than its predecessors. It was used to burn away tall elephant grass that concealed ambushes and to clear the spider holes used by enemy snipers. The weapon was also mounted on riverine boats known as Zippo boats, which patrolled the Mekong Delta. These Zippo boats were modified landing craft equipped with high-pressure water cannons that had been converted to shoot napalm. They could unleash a wall of fire along the riverbanks to detonate booby traps and suppress enemy fire. The visual spectacle of the burning jungle reflected in the muddy water became one of the defining images of the River War. Yet the usage of the weapon in Vietnam also brought it under intense scrutiny from the media and the public back home. The ethical debate surrounding the flamethrower had always existed, but it reached a boiling point in the 1970s. The horrific injuries caused by napalm and liquid fire were broadcast into living rooms around the world. The weapon was seen by many as inhumane and indiscriminate, causing suffering that went beyond the necessary bounds of warfare. Critics argued that burning a combatant to death was a cruel and unusual punishment that violated the basic dignity of man, even in war. By the late 1970s, the United States military began to phase out the flamethrower from its active inventory. The Department of Defense issued a directive in 1978 that effectively retired the weapon from combat use. The decision was driven by both public opinion and practical tactical considerations. Modern thermobaric weapons and rocket launchers could achieve similar bunker-busting effects without the need for a soldier to carry a heavy and dangerous fuel tank on his back. The international community solidified this shift with the adoption of Protocol III of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. This treaty restricts the use of incendiary weapons against civilians and limits their use against military targets located within civilian concentrations. While it did not strictly ban the flamethrower for all military uses, it created a legal and moral framework that discouraged its deployment. Most modern armies have since abandoned the liquid fuel flamethrower in favor of other technologies. Today, the flamethrower exists primarily as a museum piece and a subject of historical study. It represents a specific era of warfare where the distance between killer and victim was terrifyingly short. The empty tanks and rusted lances sit in display cases as silent witnesses to the horrors of the 20th century. They remind us of the lengths to which humanity will go to overcome an entrenched enemy and the terrible price paid by the soldiers who wielded the fire. The legacy of the flamethrower is a complex scar on the history of combat. It was a weapon born of desperation in the trenches and perfected in the bunkers of the Pacific. It saved the lives of the soldiers who used it by ending battles quickly, but it did so by inflicting a gruesome death on the opposition. It was a tool of ultimate utility and ultimate cruelty. The image of the flame arcing through the air remains one of the most powerful symbols of the brutality of close-quarters combat. As we look back on the history of military technology, the flamethrower stands out as a unique anomaly. It was not a weapon of precision like the sniper rifle, nor a weapon of mass destruction like the atomic bomb. It was a weapon of intimacy and terror. It forced soldiers to confront the reality of killing in its most primal form. The fire has long since been extinguished, but the whisper of its roar still echoes through the history of warfare.